With that, I invite Devarshi ji. Namaste, Devarshi ji.
Thank you, Lata, for hosting this, for putting it on, and thank you everyone for joining us.
So we could begin with a prayer and invocation from you, Devarshi ji, and a brief meditation.
So let's invoke and feel the presence of our great Kriya masters, guiding all of us as we strive to go deeper into their practices, deeper into an understanding of the full breadth and depth of what they have given us. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yoganandaji, beloved Kriya Guide, Swami Kriyanandaji, saints of all religions, we bow with gratitude at your feet. Divine Mother, thank you for bringing us together, for sending your enlightened sons to guide us on this path homeward to thee. Awaken within us ever deeper yearning for thy grace, thy love, thy freedom. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And we will just do an invocation to the gurus. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Para Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Brahmanandam Paramasukharam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatikam Gagana Satrisham Tattvamashadi Laksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvade Sakshibhutam Bhavatikam Trigunarahitam Satgurum Tvam Namahami Tvameva Mata Chapita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhu Chasaka Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravinam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Namo Deva Deva. And let's meditate for just 1 or 2 minutes here. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Namaste and welcome everyone once again. We're delighted to see now close to 200 people joining us live from all over the world for this beautiful book study. And what makes it really honor is to have the author with us. And so you could read and connect with him in meaningful ways and over a period of 3 sessions. So we have 2 more sessions on the next 2 Wednesdays on the 8th and 16th of August. My name is Lata, and I will be your host today. I serve as the director of the Ananda India Yoga School, and supporting this Zoom session and all of the registrations and interactions have been Amrita, who is based out of Pune and also a yoga teacher from the yoga school, and Tuchar and Prem Das from the monastery. So if you need any tech support during or between these sessions for recordings, etc., then do get in touch with Amrita. The recordings will be available 48 hours after each of the sessions. This is a large format. We've had close to 500 people registering for this event. So the participants will be on a listen-only mode. And our mode of interaction will be the chat box. So do keep communicating and interacting over the chat box. So with that, we will go into our session today. And first of all, I'd like to briefly introduce Nayaswami Devarshi ji, who doesn't need an introduction for those of us who are practitioners of Kriya, but there have been a very wide audience from all around the world, so for their benefit. So Nayaswami Devarshi now lives in India, Chandigarh, but he spent a lot of time and is from the United States. He has been on the path of Kriya Yoga and a practitioner now for almost 5 decades. And he is a Kriyacharya, that is someone who is ordained to initiate devotees into this ancient practice of Kriya Yoga. He has also been an Ananda minister for a very long time. And he leads the Ananda monastery in India. And that is how he is based in Chandigarh, along with the monks there and building a monastery. A few little other things about him. He is a passionate photographer. And one of the favorite pictures of Swami Kriyananda that you also see on his coffee table book about Swami, that picture was clicked by Devashiji. And he's also a passionate gardener. So quite a few interesting hobbies along with this path of Kriya Yoga that he's been a practitioner for such a long time. And to briefly then, let's introduce you to the book. I'm sure most of you would have got a copy. And if not, then you know where to get it. And I would request Premdas and Amrita to also drop in the chat box the link in case you're in a city where there is no Ananda Center and you're still wanting to buy the book. But personally, for me, I'm now on the second round of reading this book. And it is just amazing as to how it is such an apt practitioner's guide. And at the same time, holds an appeal to someone who is curious about these teachings and is wanting to step into this path. And at the same time, also for people who are beginners of practitioners of practice of Kriya. So he has managed to make the book relevant and inspirational for people across the spectrum. And I think that is a tough ask for any author, but it speaks to each one of us in many deep and meaningful ways. So for today's session, roughly the chapters 1 to 5 is what could be covered and maybe overlapping a bit here and there. But what is good for you to then is to read to chapter 10 or 11 over the week so that you can get up to speed for the next section of the book study. So that is a little bit the overview of how we are structuring this for you. And in today's session, will be sharing a few questions with Devashiji just to help us all get familiar with his inspiration and a bit about the book. And then we will get a chance to hear him give a small talk about the book, as well as maybe some excerpts that he wishes to highlight for this part of the book study. And then we will go into question and answers based on what's coming in from the audiences. We've had a few questions which have been pre-submitted over email that Amrita has shared with me, and I have them printed with me, so I would be using them. But I encourage you as you go along to share questions in the chat box, and we will pick it up in that section of today's session. So with that, we will then invite Devashiji to come and interact with our audience and help us get to know you a little bit more. So Devashiji, my first question is that the book is a fruit of nearly 5 decades of practice and sharing the teachings of Kriya with others all around the world. Let's begin at the beginning. How did you come to the path of Kriya Yoga?
Well, much of this is in the book, and it's really relevant to this day and age because the way that I came to the path of meditation, yoga, Kriya Yoga, it relates to what Paramahansa Yogananda, our masters, wrote about and spoke about this age of Dwapara Yuga, an age of energy that is starting to dissolve a lot of the dogmas, the forms, the rituals, the churchianity. And I was brought up in a churchianity, and I have respect for that church. It was the Catholic Church. But the local church that I was brought up in, I never really related to it. God didn't make sense to me the way they taught it. It was not that I was anti-religion or anti-God at all. It was just that it didn't connect. There was no relevance or reality to it. I knew that there was some higher reality, a purpose we were here. And this whole era that I was coming up as a teenager was the time when yoga meditation were first coming into popular awareness through the whole hippie era, the drug culture, all these things. And they were starting just to be the very first books about meditation and yoga to appear. And I was part of that whole wave of energy, really. It really was a wave of energy for those who were living at that time of just searching, seeking, questioning, doubting, questioning everything our elders had created and the churches. And that's Dwapara Yuga. It shakes things up, it infuses the planet with a new energy. And I was caught up in that. And fortunately, through grace, I was receptive to it. And I think I had strong samskars and impressions from past lifetimes to get on this very quickly. Because as I describe in the book, even while still a teenager and just finishing high school, I just was starting to read books about yoga meditation by Baba Ram Dass, the American teacher, and others. And just, it was really starting to awaken, I think, memories from past lifetimes because I was instantly drawn to those things. But what really triggered it all was an experience of God as divine bliss that was spontaneous, that happened while I was walking in a forest behind where I grew up. And I grew up almost in that forest because there was a couple miles of just jungle, as we would call it in India, forest as we would call it in America. And so my mind was not a linear thinking mind with city streets and a curriculum and what I was going to do with my life. It was very non-linear, actually, in many ways. And I think I was just receptive partly because of that. And I had this experience of divine joy, and I knew right away. It was triggered, obviously, by my reading and my awareness. And I knew at that moment that this was God. And I had never even thought too hard about what is God before that. But when I had that feeling of divine joy, it was overwhelming. And it came with an experience of divine love for creatures, for this man I saw while I was out walking. And it really was it was life-changing. And it really launched me on this path because I knew at that moment I took a vow at that moment that I will spend the rest of my life as a yogi seeking God. And it was a very strange vow to make because I had never even met a yogi at that point. I didn't even know how to find a yogi. But these are when we have strongly, written samskars from past lives, they come up. And for all of us who are here now, who are meditating, who are practicing Kriya, trust that if we do have to reincarnate again, if we're not liberated, we've been writing in pretty bold, strong print these actions of meditation, of seeking our heart's yearning, this commitment. And if we leave this body with this very strong call to God, to give ourselves to God and to our gurus, right away in the next life, Master said we would be quickly brought up and finish the work of Kriya Yoga if we don't finish it in this life. So I've learned to trust quite a lot that will happen. And I saw it happen in my early life, and I think many of us here have too. So I think that in a nutshell is how I came. It took me a while to find my guru. I knew I needed to find a guru, and I knew all the gurus and all the crazy people were in California. I grew up in the middle part of the United States, so I moved to California as soon as I could to look for my guru in California. These are intuitions that I had in strange ways, but they were all true. And they eventually led me to Ananda and to Swami Kriyananda.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that time of change. And I think the world is again going through a time of great change.
Yep.
And the subtitle of your book is Spiritual Awakening for the New Age. What are some aspects of the new age, the way you see it? And how is Kriya Yoga particularly helpful to practice in these times?
Yeah, that title is very interesting. I didn't come up with that tagline part of the title. It was Nayaswami Devarshi who came up with that, because it's a very interesting mixture, combination of words. Because I was thinking spiritual practice for a new age, but she said spiritual awakening for the new age. And it really ties and touches into what the book is trying to do in many ways, which is to take us away from this idea that it's just a technique and just a practice. It's a whole awakening energy and consciousness that we are part of, that the whole Kriya path is part of, that this wave of energy of Dwapara Yuga coming in is part of. And so it's a spiritual awakening that's happening right now. And I think the pandemic was a big part of, hastening people questioning everything. And I think that was the trigger right now in this time, in these years, the biggest trigger to get people to question, what am I doing with my life? What have I been doing? And, a lot of people really rethought everything during that time. And all of us did too, I think, in many ways. And so this new age is Dwapara Yuga, and it's the dawn of Dwapara Yuga. It is in Dwapara Yuga, but it's early. And what Swamiji said about this time is that the remnants of form, of rigidity, of dogmatism, churchianity from Kali Yuga are still very strong, which is the age of just matter. And this new wave of energy is coming in. And Kriya Yoga, as both a practice, techniques, but as a whole way, an approach to life, is a way of riding this wave of energy of Dwapara Yuga, rather than getting smashed by this wave. And I use this analogy in the book of it being a wave, a huge wave of energy sweeping the planet and all of ours, and inwardly. And a surfer riding a surfboard learns how to ride a big wave through practice, through skill, through strength, through energy. And if he learns how to do it well, he can catch that large wave and go quickly to the shore and have a good ride rather than a crazy ride. And so if he doesn't learn, then when that big wave comes, he'll get smashed by that wave. And that's what's happening right now, I think, on our planet. This is a new age. And how do we deal with this new influx of energy that's sweeping the planet? And this is why our masters brought Kriya Yoga now. Now, in fact, they brought it in 1862 or 3 to Ranikhet in the Himalayas, but they were just planting the seed of Kriya Yoga so that it would sprout into plants right now in all of us who have started learning it, practicing it in all these years, who are now living in cities and not in caves, and who are part of this, crazy energy sweeping over the planet. Everyone says everything's getting faster and more crazy, and that's what this energy is about. But Master Swamiji also said that during Dwapara Yuga, we can more easily be receptive to that energy. And this is one of the interesting things about this new age. It's not just more energy and more intensity. It's also that consciousness is awakening so that we can be more receptive. Our hearts can be more open and receptive to higher aspects of divine love too, and divine grace, not just the quantity of energy, but these qualities of divine grace too are more here now. And many of us saw this during the pandemic when hearts were opened, and some people were smashed by the wave, but many people, their hearts opened and they practiced heroic love, as Swami Kriyananda calls this type of love where we sacrifice and give ourselves completely to helping others, even when it's extraordinarily difficult. And so these are all the aspects of this new age. But the other side of it is that there's a big conflict going on. Yogananda said there would be an extraordinary conflict that would really, almost destroy the planet, and people would have to almost start all over again at some point. And then he said there would be a golden age after that. But this conflict is, Swami Kriyananda said, interestingly, it's the way he said this, for me, everything made sense when I saw that. When he said that the old matter-born Kali Yuga churches, forms, political systems, dictators, that whole approach, they also have more energy now because of the energy of Dwapara Yuga coming in. So they're also energized. But that said, their time is almost up, but there will be a conflict that we are seeing right now in the world. And it will probably surely get more intense from what our master said. And so that's part of this new age. I mean, you can't avoid the conflict part of it. And so the spiritual awakening part, Master said, I quote him in the introduction, you are on the eve of a great spiritual awakening, a great change in the churches where true souls will be drawn to seek the experience of God's presence. And that is the spiritual awakening, is experiencing God's presence. And now we have the tools, the energy, the receptivity to have that experience. And when we have that experience, then grace changes us and transforms us and helps us to be an instrument for that grace in this world. And that's what we came to do in a nutshell. And so this is why also I bring the book at the beginning, at the end, to this focus on its purpose is to help us to know God and to experience God. That's why Master brought Kriya Yoga in the end. And all these other things will naturally come up of themselves when we have that divine experience. And then we'll be able to understand energy, understand what we are supposed to be doing during this time, be a cause rather than an effect, be an instrument for God. All the different challenges of this age will really be easier, and we will know the way when we have regular inner communion and the experience of God's presence. So that's the spiritual awakening part, which is very important to this. So.
Yeah, so scary times ahead, but comes with a lot of support from the masters is what I take from this conversation.
Yeah, and from all of each other and the Sangha that we have and our mutual support.
Absolutely. And so Devashiji, you work with practitioners of Kriya and meditators all over the world, and you also counsel them. And we were curious that, what are some of the obstacles that people face on their path? And what could be some ways that will help them be more consistent in their practice and really fuel their growth spiritually?
Yeah. In a way, that's why that was the main motivation for this book, was after, decades of sharing these teachings. I first actually started working with the early form of the Kriya Sangha in the late 1980s. Swami Ananda had me working with training people even then for some time. And I've seen that not everyone gets the same results from Kriya. And a lot of people leave the path of Kriya, either because they aren't getting results or they aren't applying themselves in the right kind of ways. And so it's not automatic. It's not mechanical. As Swamiji often said, Kriya is not mechanical in the results that it gives. And so how does it work in the results that it gives? And I've had the blessing of seeing in many, many people the ways and the means that give the best results. And this book was informed by that experience over the years of seeing what is important for those who want to get the right results from Kriya. Because, partly I couldn't in a book for the general public, I couldn't talk about the technique at all. And we won't be talking about the technique itself or the details of it during these 3 weeks. So I couldn't talk about that, but in a way that was a blessing, because it gave the opportunity in a way for me to talk about what was really important. Because, as I share early on in the book, this man I knew who could not make the Kriya sounds properly because of condition that he had. And yet he got extraordinary results from the Kriya technique and the path of Kriya, even though the sounds of the technique were completely off. It wasn't even remotely sounding like Kriya Yoga. And so that moment was actually a big eye-opener and game changer for me to understand that our part is to do the practices the best that we can. But if that's all we do, we're not going to get very much. And this is what I've seen. It's when we focus on essentially what I share in this book with God communion, as coming back to that original purpose of why we practice Kriya, of having God contact and developing the yearning for God. Because having that yearning, that's probably the one thing that I see causing people to drop off, is that passion and yearning goes away. And so I talk early in the book about people who have passion for anything succeed at that thing, no matter what it is. But passion for God, passion for these practices, passion to serve and to give and share with others the grace that we experience. Having that yearning and that desire, which is a desireless desire, but awakening that desire in the heart, that's one of the real keys. That's maybe the biggest deal breaker in the promise that the masters gave, that you can make saints of us within a few years through these practices of Kriya. But if that yearning dries up, then the interest in doing these things with energy and concentration dries up. And you'll see that people who even concentrate on something, it's mostly because they have interest in it and passion in it. It's easy to concentrate on a movie that's really engrossing and just has grabbed our heartstrings in a way, in some way. But if something's boring, then we don't concentrate. Our concentration is weak. And so developing that intense feeling of the heart, and feeling is, again, key to all of it. And this is what I've seen also, that ignoring that feeling energy, we ignore the fire that really fuels a lifetime of Kriya practice and staying with it. And yeah, there will be dry periods, or long dry periods even. But if we have that strong sort of a foundation of yearning and knowing that this is what we want, and calling to God, even in our restlessness, even when we're in the midst of desires and, giving into all the, weaknesses that we might have, but we keep going back to God and keep having that in our hearts. That is the biggest key that I've seen. And that's partly why I approach the book in the sense of art and science, because it's not just enough to understand the philosophy and the techniques and to do them in the right way. Swami Kriyananda called that huffing and puffing, when you just make sounds and you're not really doing more than that with it. And so this book ties together. You'll see that the thread of art and science is kind of woven throughout the book. And it kind of goes almost back and forth at times, with chapters, not exactly, but, there will be a few chapters on working with the feeling energy, which is more the art side of it. And then we'll go back to some of the science and technique. And you see that they're not separate in the end. And maybe I'll share a little bit about the writing of the book in this context, because, I didn't really know how to, quote, organize a book like this. I had some thoughts and ideas, maybe I'll talk more a little bit when you ask me about the book and the writing of it, but I had to get myself out of the way completely. And I laughed when you said that an author must be happy that the author was able to reach so many different people, Kriya bonds, non-Kriya bonds. Well, the author didn't do that. It was when the author finally kicked himself out of the way and allowed God and the gurus to flow through. And that was actually the biggest challenge in writing a book. It was me. It was this guy, Devarshi, sitting here, who kept getting in the way. And because I had all this experience and understanding, and so I thought I had to kind of, I have to do this, and I can do it, and I have so much. But it was really only when I got out of the way and let Master and Swamiji work through me and ask them, okay, what book do you want me to write? Because there's so many options in that way. That's when this flow of art and science and being woven throughout the book, tying them all together, is really how that came. But it also speaks to how we gain the most from Kriya Yoga. We put out our willpower, which I did. I did everything I could to try the best. But then at the last, I had to step out of the way. And from that elevated level of energy, from using my willpower and concentration, then from that elevated place, they were able to flow through more easily. And in a way that describes the process of practicing Kriya and meditation and God communion. So.
Yeah. And we could see that shine through in the book. So talking of the book, Devarshiji, how would you recommend that your readers use this book as a guide? And tell us a bit about how have you structured it and what would be the best way to use it?
Yeah. So again, I wouldn't say that I structured it, but in a way, it was structured in that, chapter by chapter, and just how that all worked together. And I'm just going to go over the chapters just very briefly, because that speaks to it. But the first chapters are about why, and having the context for what this New Age is, and how Kriya works with all that, energy, magnetism, control of energy. And then art and science is introduced after that. And then it goes into working with the feeling energy, which is far on the art side, and the passion, what I was talking about, getting away from technique, working with divine grace, with emotional reactivity, all these things. And then it gets into more, again, back into a little bit of the science of action and karma, what Kriya really is, how to change ourselves, how to work with changing our karma and destiny, and getting back into the goal. Just a little reminder every once in a while that the goal is God realization and God communion. And so that's kind of the flow of the book, but I didn't consciously come up with that flow. That's the thing. When I tried to come up with an organized flow, I couldn't. And it was really only when I started working more with intuition, which is the calm sort of feeling perception of the heart, and tuning into Master and Swamiji, that it just naturally flowed like that. So for readers to get the most from the book, I would say, one, read it the way it was written, more as a intuitive understanding and flow, because I think each person will be guided differently by what they need in the book. And so I would say the first time someone reads the book, do it with attention, chapter by chapter, rather than, I would only read one chapter at a time, in a way, is what I would recommend, and sit with it for a day or two at least, rather than going through the whole book quickly and having time to kind of tune into it. That's how it was written, really precisely, in a way. It was not written all at once. It was written quite over time. And then go through the book that way and actually apply them and try to find how you can apply certain aspects of what is given in that book. Especially pay attention to the quotes from Master and Swamiji, because for me, those are really an essential part of the book, because those are passages from Autobiography of a Yogi and from Swamiji's writings that really, they triggered a lot of the perception in the book. And I think to go back to that original trigger for everybody in those chapters could be very, very helpful for people. So then, once reading the book, then I think different chapters can be a standalone prod to understanding more deeply how to work with emotional feeling, how to work with the reactive process, if that's what one is going through. So you can also use the book that way after going through it completely at least once. And just find ways to reflect and apply a different understanding to your practice. One of our longtime Kriyacharyas, I think it was Nayaswami Ananda, he said that he spoke for a lot of other people who have been doing this for decades. He said people who have been doing Kriya for decades are always refining and deepening their practice in the way that they approach it, because we are evolving spiritually. Our spine is the channel is getting more open, and we are able to understand on new levels. And this is one of the pitfalls of a Kriya Yoga practice, is getting into habit and then getting into rut because of it, where we just do it mechanically, we do it the same way. And I think that happens to everybody. So this is nothing new. But this book is kind of like a refresh and a reboot and a rethink, and really try to apply, not because the book doesn't have a lot of techniques and exercises. There may be a workbook someday that goes along with this book that might be a good thing for Kriya Bandhs, working with each chapter. But it's more just, turn around in your mind how you approach the practice of Kriya, because that's where I've seen the most gains in my practice, is changing my approach of just maybe doing Kriya with not just more devotion, but with intense devotion, just with, pure just devotion more than anything else. And, at times, not just exclusively, but at different times, just completely rethinking how you approach these things. And I'll give another example. During the pandemic, we did a few times, and we'll do it again, a 2-hour straight practice of Hong Sau technique, because Hong Sau is an integral part of Kriya practice. And so we did a guided practice of 2 hours straight without break of just Hong Sau. And it really completely opens your mind to just a completely new understanding of the depth and the power of Hong Sau. So just, the book is just given to kind of get all of us to relook, rethink, restart, practice in different ways, and try different things and experiment with different approaches, especially that are in the book.
Thank you for that. And in the introduction section of the book, there is a quote from the Autobiography of a Yogi, where Bhaduri Mahashaya said to Yogananda, "Have you developed Anubhava? Do not mistake the technique for the goal." And oftentimes, that is a condition that many of us practitioners slip into. We put in the attendance, do the practice, and hope that things will work out one way or the other. But what could be some suggestions from you for practitioners to really develop Anubhava and go deeper? How has your own journey shaped?
I first want to say that I think every single Kriya yogi has gotten into that mechanical practice where they forget all about Anubhav. They finish Kriya, they jump up, they don't have the time after where they really sit and practice intercommunion, or they rush through it, or we are too restless to really go deep into that, or we don't know what to do. So we've all experienced that. And so this is one of those things that it's really important to always be coming back to, is that we do these things to have this experience of God. And when we have an experience of God of any kind, that is the real fire that keeps a practice going. And that experience is different for everybody. And this is one of those things to experiment with. The second to last chapter is on intercommunion and what that means. Intercommunion is the word that Swamiji used, the phrase that he used in America. And I think it's not just in America. I think sometimes the way he phrased things were just to get us out of a habit. Because I think, in India, I'm only speculating, but I think in India, people hear Anubhav, and maybe they just put it in a slot on the shelf. Oh yeah, Anubhav, I heard about that a long time ago, and this is what it is. And Swamiji, by saying intercommunion, it just looks at it in a new way, just like this book looks at a lot of things in a new way. And it is just saying to us, it's within ourselves, we are communing with God or an aspect of God. And that communion part is it's a sacred being with God. And so I find it helpful, one, to do what Swamiji recommends, which is to start. Yes, it's fine to start by praying to God and meditating on God, but I quickly now try, when I'm during my intercommunion part of my practice, I try to feel very quickly that I am in God and God is in me. And that communion, the key part of communion is union. And it's not something that just is a big splash at the very end when we have samadhi bliss union with God. It's to practice union with God. And that comes from praying in God, meditating in God, feeling that God is in us, feeling that Guru is in us, feeling that we are in Guru. So that's one part of, especially the union part of communion. But I also find it very helpful. Being in India, it's easier because there's so many pilgrimage places. There are so many kind of strong reminders of the divine here that is just in public, even just walking down the street, any street, many times the block, even sometimes there's little altars and shrines. And so there's just more of a reminder regularly of God and what it's all about, and seeing God everywhere and experiencing God just every step of the street. And just there's more reminders of that. Pilgrimage is also a very powerful way to kind of get back to that reminder that it's about being in this vibration of God. And when I say being in, I really just cannot emphasize enough that it's being in, within, and feeling that presence of God in us and us in God. So try to find ways to experience that in every meditation. And it's different for everyone. We talk about the 8 aspects of God, and those are, 8 different ways that we can experience and be in God and be in the light. And, I may mention this in the book, but I find it very helpful to sing this chant that Swamiji wrote to Divine Mother: "Come out of the darkness, Mother, bathe me in thy light." And so when I chant that, and sometimes, and this is where I sort of rethink everything at times after, doing these things for so many decades, is sometimes right after a chant. We're used to doing the chant, and then we tense and relax and do measured breathing, and we get away sometimes from the feeling of the chant and too much into technique. Sometimes take a chant into that inner communion and feel the light of Divine Mother bathing us. It's not just an impersonal light that's bright light. It's a pure loving light. It's the light of and grace of Divine Mother filling us and bathing us. And do that as a visualization, but also as a feeling, and feeling that that loving light filling us and bathing us. And so we can do that with any of the aspects of God. And it's good to experiment with all the different ones at times, because that is the experience of God, is tuning into one of those aspects. And that's what Master recommended during intercommunion, especially, is to tune into one of the 8 aspects of God consciously, or we can tune into the Divine Mother or whatever way we worship. But do that very consciously every time we meditate. It's not just kind of waiting for God to lay it on us, whatever, and just kind of be passive. It's a time to lift ourselves up into that place where the experience happens. And so part of that is working more with giving of ourselves unconditionally. And this is one experiment that I have done at times where, for a week or two, I would recommend, these are experiments to do, experiments in Kriya Yoga and in this path. But I'll spend a week or two where I don't ever ask for anything from God. Even in the intercommunion part, I don't ask God to come to me. I just give myself to God only. And it's kind of an unbalanced approach, and it's not something that you want to do all the time, but it's proof of concept of when we, sometimes God's not coming to us because all we're ever doing is me, come to me, come to me, come to me, me is where you're supposed to come. And by working in that way solely, we can be too self-involved and it can be contractive. And so this helps me to break out from that and just to practice only giving, asking nothing in return of God, offering myself in Kriya from the heart to the spiritual eye in pure giving. And then from that uplifted place that we are giving lifts us up into, then if we ask for the experience of God, it's much more likely to come because we've expanded and uplifted, and we're in that place where we do experience God's presence. Because God's presence does come from a heart that's turned upwards and given upwards and is lifted up and offered up to the spiritual eye and in that realm where the divine is experienced. And the techniques actually are part of that, because Kriya helps to lift the energy up, and especially working with helping to lift up the feeling energy from that place of I, me, mine that can be contractive into an uplifted and more expansive and less ego-centered awareness. So these are some ways to work with Anubhav. There are many more.
Quite some tips there. And now, Devarshi, you talked about getting the I, me out of the way. But one of the things I've also heard is that as people come onto the path of Kriya Yoga, they tend to face some major tests in their lives, but with the Guru's protection. And I'm sure in your own life, you must have faced some of these. How have those tests influenced your journey on the spiritual path?
This does happen. I think sometimes people exaggerate that, or you hear people get Kriya and they say, oh, all these bad things started happening and, I didn't want to do Kriya. I wanted to actually mention something about that because I had a friend in the early years of Ananda who was going through some extreme tests. I mean, just karmic bombs that were just kind of going off left and right, and desire and just chaos in his life. And he asked Swamiji, well, should I be doing less Kriya during this time? Because there's this thought that Kriya can start to wake up some of these old karmas and so that we can work on them. And Swamiji's answer surprised him. He said, no, you should be doing more Kriya during this time to give the strength to be able to get through those tests. So tests do come. I think that tests may come more suddenly, more quickly to the soul that wants to find God. That's where the tests come from. When the soul is serious about wanting to find God, God gives tests. And tests that's not a great word, because we think of tests as blows to the head and seeing how God's smashing us just to look at us and see how we'll respond. And it's not quite like that. And it's not like an exam, but these are karmic challenges. And what I've seen, and I heard Swami Kriyananda say this recently, which has confirmed how I've seen it as being true. He said in a talk I was listening to just a couple of weeks ago, he said that the greatest growth, without exception, in his life, growth spurts and types of growth, have always happened during the greatest tests and challenges, or as the outcome of the greatest tests and challenges of his life. And so tests and challenges are given by God to us as a gift because our soul is serious. Our soul has said, Lord, I want you. I want freedom. I want to be free. Help me. And believe it or not, that's God's help. Those tests coming to us. I think it helps to have a sense of humor about it at times. And I think Master and Swamiji did too, the way they talked about, praying to God and praying to Divine Mother. But I've seen this again and again, that my greatest growth came because I was given a challenge. And in order to overcome that challenge, I had to put out more energy. I maybe had to put out a certain type of energy, maybe more love, maybe more patience or perseverance, maybe more selflessness, whatever was needed. God gave me the exact thing that I needed to help me to reach a level of inner freedom from that challenge. And I've seen this, we all face tests, and I've had mine, and I've seen other people face theirs. Many of you knew my wife, Maria, when she was alive, and she had a test-filled life. I mean, she grew up in the worst of the Soviet Union, had to escape there and with great difficulty, and faced challenges with, not knowing a soul here in the US, and getting established, and had health challenges, fighting cancer for 10 years. But as Yogananda said, an easy life is not a victorious life. And hers was a victorious life. And her soul wanted freedom. Her soul came into this life wanting divine freedom. And because her soul said to God, I want freedom, God said, okay, let's get on with it and let's work at it. And I'm going to give you opportunities to overcome all your karma in this life and learn all the lessons that you need to learn. And so even with cancer that she fought for 10 years, we had a mantra in our lives, actually, that was prodded by something Swami Kriyananda said. And our mantra simply was Guru's grace, Guru's grace. Anything that came, a test, the worst karmic, quote, test or challenge, or great blessings or grace, it was always Guru's grace, Guru's grace. And where this originated was when Swamiji wrote to Ananda Ma about being thrown out of SRF. And he couldn't understand why. I mean, on the face of it, this was terrible. It was the worst tragedy and betrayal of his Guru Bhais. And he could make no sense out of it. And he saw nothing good in it. He really couldn't. And he wrote Ananda Ma, help me understand and make sense of this. And she said, try to see this as your Guru's grace. And Swamiji said it was the last thing that he saw it as. But over time he did, and finally recognized that it was the Guru's grace to help him find God, to help him become free, to help him start Ananda and to fulfill the work his Guru gave him to do. And so it really helps to see karmic tests and challenges as God's answer to our soul call to become free in this life and to know God. And for those souls who are really, really serious about freedom and have reached the point of no return in all our lifetimes of evolution, God will help us do that. And it will come through seeming challenges and tests and tragedies. But if we can see the hand of Guru in those things, as I've been able to do with everything that comes, and a new thing comes, and at first we think, oh God, why is this happening? I thought I was doing pretty good, or did I screw up that this health challenge came, or what did I do wrong? But if we can somehow get out of that, or get out of blaming someone else for something that's done to us, but if we can somehow look for the hand of grace behind it, then the power to overcome also comes with that grace. And so Kriya Yogis, yeah, we don't have easy lives. And no one does on this planet, really, in the end. We don't come on the path of Kriya to have an easier life. We came to find God, but no one really has it easy on this planet. I mean, people sometimes ask that question, why do bad things always seem to happen to good people? And it's a good question, but bad things happen to bad people too when you look at it. It's just, that's part of being on this planet and having a body, and let's use it to find God in the end, rather than just to see it as a bad karma or this or that. And I also try to get out of this thought of it's just a bad karma I'm working out, because that somehow doesn't awaken the faculty of trying to put out energy to overcome in some way and to learn and to grow. So for Kriya Yogis, these things are so essential to our freedom. And the more aware we can be when these things come, and to see the hand of God behind it, that's when we really gain the most from it and are able to overcome. And we also find that if we see the Guru's hand, then we are also given the strength from the Guru to be able to overcome anything in this life, no matter how seemingly difficult. And it's hard to see the hand of God, but this was Master's way. It's why he read that poem, The Hound of Heaven, which has the beautiful, where this man is running from God lifetime after lifetime, and throughout his life, he's running from the hound of heaven. The hound is God chasing him. And at the very end of the poem, he just writes in surrender. He says, I see now that the shadow was thy hand, the shadow on the darkness seeming was thy hand stretched out in blessing and trying to reach out to me. And so, it's not easy to see that, the darkness or the shadow or the test as God's hand stretched in blessing, but it's possible to see that. And I found that's when I gained the most from tests and challenges.
Try and stick with that reminder, Guru's grace. It's easier when there are blessings and nice divine gifts coming our way. Harder in times when we're facing challenges. And that kind of brings me to the last section of this interview kind of with you, which is around the fact that, we live in an age right now, particularly during the pandemic and aftermath of that, of people being in very heightened emotional states of difficult emotions. There's a lot of fear, anger, maybe a sense of despair, helplessness, or even feeling boredom. And one of the questions that then comes is, how does a practice of Kriya Yoga help us? And are there some scientific evidences to the efficacy of Kriya Yoga when one is going through such emotions?
Yeah, there are scientific studies of meditation. As far as I know, there haven't been scientific studies so much of Kriya Yoga in particular, but I think our own eyes show us with people that we see that are really learning to transcend fear, suffering, despair, all these different emotions. And the scientific studies do show that meditation changes the very brain, changes the blood flow of the brain, and it's very convincing evidence that even simple practices of mindfulness, of being in the moment, help to change the body, the blood pressure, the stress levels, all these things. And I personally believe that Kriya Yoga takes it to another level of helping us to work with the emotions of fear and despair and loss that we all face. And I think the heat was turned up during the pandemic, and these things were brought up more. And I saw that Kriya Yogis who were really avid and who were serious and understood much of what we've been talking about rose above all that. Babaji, I think is partly why Babaji said to Lahiri Mahashai, to tell all of your Kriya Yoga disciples this passage from the Bhagavad Gita, that even a little practice of this inward religion will free one from dire fears and colossal sufferings. And what is dire fears and colossal sufferings? I think at times some Ananda people think that only means the cataclysms and all the worst case scenarios. But fear and suffering, it's our lot in life in a way at times. It's there. And when we just step back and we meditate, and I'm speaking for myself too, that it still comes, anxiety still comes when we let our mind come back down, or when we get caught up in the outwardness of this world and tests and challenges, and worry comes. So, dire fears, colossal sufferings, that included worry, anxiety, fear for the future, fear for our health, just this sort of vague anxiety that comes at times where you just can't put your finger on it, but you just feel very unsettled. And this is, for me, Kriya Yoga especially works with those things in a way that is really unique to Kriya, because it works in the whole sort of middle part of the book, which we'll get into more next week, talks about working with those emotions of fear, worry, anger, greed, lust, desire, attraction, all these things that just agitate the heart's energy. And Kriya is almost particularly designed to work with the agitated emotional feelings of the heart. First, by calming those waves of feeling through practices like Hong Sa, which is just, I can't say enough about that technique. Kriya Yogis, for those of you who want to reboot your practice, really get into Hong Sa again, really practice it a lot. Do a 2-hour practice of it sometime and have that experience. And maybe we'll do a guided 2-hour practice sometime as a follow-up to this 3-week course that we're doing, and see the power of that to calm the agitated feeling of the heart, which of course Patanjali defined yoga as yogas chitta vritti nirod, as calming these waves of feeling in the heart, and then uplifting that calm feeling, because we're not just trying to calm or deaden the feelings of the heart. We're trying to calm them enough that they're not causing agitation in our minds and in our consciousness. And when that agitation is calmed down, even not to 100%, but to some degree, then we can start to be aware of the divine presence. We can start to be more inwardly aware of feeling energy as something that we can give upwards to God in devotional practices, but especially then with the Kriya technique, which Swamiji said every Kriya should be an act of devotional self-offering. This is where that's kind of the missing piece for many people, that they do the technique, but they're not doing it as a pure act of sacred devotional worship and giving of our love to God when we bring the energy up the spine. And when from that calm, relatively calm center, we don't have to be perfectly calm with Hong Sa, but relatively calm, when we can offer that feeling upwards to the spiritual eye with this current that Kriya brings up very powerfully. It's a vehicle for carrying that feeling energy upwards. And it's a vehicle for helping us to offer our love more intensely and more purely upwards to God. And so when Kriya technique even is done with that extreme devotional giving, calmly but powerfully and inwardly, with bringing the energy up the sushumna and offering it to God at the point between the eyebrows, this is kind of the missing piece, I think, for many people, because it starts working with the feeling energy and uplifting that feeling energy and turning it into divine feeling, which is God. Swamiji, I quote him, he says that God is feeling, which is an amazing statement. I've never heard anyone ever say it like that. He said, God is feeling. And then he said that feeling is Satchidananda, divine bliss, but God is that feeling energy when it's been turned from human fear, anxiety, and into the divine feeling energy. And so much of working with Kriya, and this is more for next week, is working with that feeling energy and learning to uplift it and transmute it and turn it into divine feeling energy. Kriya is the practice for that. It really is, if you look at it that way.
So Devashiji, now I'll invite you to the next section where you cover the first 5 chapters broadly for the audience in terms of highlighting.
Okay. Yeah, so we have done much of that right now already with this, and with the introduction especially, and the first chapter also. Just the first chapter is very important for Kriya Yogis too. It's not just a chapter describing for the general public why Kriya Yoga is now and what this new age means in terms of churchianity and religion. It also can really help inform or re-inform how we practice Kriya. And the chapter gets into, there's 7 points there at the end of the chapter that talks about some of the things that Swamiji Master talked about Dwapara Yuga bringing. And one of them is a growing awareness of energy, not just more energy, but an awareness of it, which is good for Kriya Yogis. Awareness is like the big first step. And I quote Swamiji in here that he said once about the yoga postures, but it applies to everything. Awareness precedes control. And before we can control energy, before we can control our emotions, we have to be aware of what our emotions are going through, because you get caught in an emotional rage and you're not even aware of what you're doing. And this is how people do such senseless things, is because they just aren't aware. But if you can just stop and be aware, oh gosh, yeah, I'm acting crazy under these negative emotions. So awareness of energy is growing. And for yogis, that's a huge boon that we have in this age. And yes, having more energy. It's a time for individuals taking responsibility for developing anubhav, that relationship with God. And we've been given the tools, but we also have to take responsibility, our part. Guru is not going to do it all for us. It's just not this passive thing of, oh, Guru's grace, he's going to do all these nice things for me. We take responsibility for it. And also just, Swamiji said that Dwapara Yuga is a time of more of an awareness of the understanding of Divine Mother's energy and grace. And he spoke and said that there was more, right now there's more of a need on the planet for Divine Mother and that awareness. It's partly why I created a website that, maybe you can post it in the chat. It's called thecosmicmother.org, thecosmicmother.org. I created this many years ago, but just to bring Master and Swamiji's teachings and other great saints about the worship of God as Divine Mother. And this is what Swamiji said. And this is one of those central quotes that is really key to this book at the end of that chapter. I quote Swamiji as saying that in Dwapara Yuga, there will be increasing awareness of the need for feminine inwardness as a balance to masculine outwardness, for inner inspiration as a balance to outward conquest, for feeling as the very essence of consciousness itself. In the struggle to adapt to these changes, it will be increasingly necessary to distinguish between calm feeling, which is intuitive, and the disruptive feelings of raw emotion. There is a need now today to recognize the importance of inner peace as the soil in which alone the plant of true happiness can flourish. And so now you can see why I'm kind of pointing people to read these quotes of Swamiji and Master, because they are the essence of where much of the clarity and the inspiration for this book comes from. So chapter 2, it talks about this being an age of energy. And there's one sentence in there that I find is really important that I wrote. And the Master essentially put it this way too, where energy is the missing link between the seeker's over-identification with matter, especially the body, and identification with the pure consciousness of spirit. And so it's not just more energy as just drinking more coffee and having more energy like that. It's really talking about more subtle energy that we tune into and having more of an awareness of these subtle energies, feeling more of a flow of that energy, having more control over that energy, which follows from having that awareness. And so this is an age of learning to work with energy. And really, we have the tools for it that Master has given us with the energization exercises and with this awareness. And chapter 3 takes it to the next step. It's an age of energy. We have more energy, and that energy can change our magnetism. And in the end, it's all about magnetism. And here's where I weave art and science back and forth, because here we're talking about magnetism and the science of magnetism, electromagnet, and all these things. But then the quote in that chapter from Autobiography of a Yogi is about Master saying, samadhi comes with a natural inevitability to the sincere devotee. His intense craving begins to pull at God with an irresistible force. The Lord, as the cosmic vision, is drawn by the seeker's magnetic ardor into his range of consciousness. In that sense, the Lord, as the cosmic vision, is drawn by the seeker's magnetic ardor into his range of consciousness. So even the experience of samadhi is drawn, the experience of union is drawn through energy, through magnetism, obviously the right kind of magnetism, magnetic ardor, intense yearning for God. And again, we keep coming back to developing this intense yearning and magnetizing it and awakening it and focusing it, which is what Kriya does. One time Swamiji said that what Kriya Yoga really is, it's a tool or a technique for fanning the flames of our devotion. And I find it helpful to have that image that when there's an increased energy flowing through the Sushumna, our devotion at the heart center that is there in the Sushumna, maybe it's asleep, but it's at least a red hot coal that's been covered, and looks dark, but there's still some red hot energy there. And the Kriya, that increased energy going through the heart center, fans that ember and that coal and ignites it and turns it into flames and creates and helps to generate this divine magnetic ardor. And this really is how Kriya works with Kriya and devotion. And that's really the power of Kriya and devotion, and doing it with that intense energy and intense devotional energy and focus and concentration. So magnetism, Swamiji says, is the secret of all success, of all inspiration, of creativity. And that chapter gets a lot into just using our intuition and using that in a way that helps us to understand that we attract success, ideas, inspiration, and God in the end. Chapter 4, it's about pranayama, not as technique, but as the condition of having that control. That said, practice is what gives us that condition. And it's important to understand that regular daily practice is really, really essential. And that if we practice Kriya morning and evening, day after day, year after year, it sounds like a long slog, especially when Kriya is not seemingly very interesting or exciting and doesn't seem to be doing much. But it's just like a master musician doing the finger exercises on the piano every single day, morning and evening, that after weeks, after years, there's just this natural control over the fingers to be able to play any piece of music with inspiration. And it's the same with us. If we do Kriya with the right approach, day in, day out, year after year, we start just step by step developing the skill. Really, it's almost like a skill to have control over the life force. And when we have that control, pranayama be thy religion. It's a wishing tree. It will give thee salvation. It is God. It's that important on the spiritual path. And as we know with Ananda Yoga, that it's one of those limbs of Patanjali that is essential, having pranayama before we can go into these higher stages of concentration and meditation and samadhi and divine union in the end. Then chapter 5 kind of brings these first parts together about how, yes, this is art and science. And so we've kind of talked about art, we've talked about science in the first 4 chapters, and now this is how it all works together. They're one. It's a combination of the two. It's not we do the art at one time and we do the science at another time. It's both and all the time. And they're woven together, just like a piece of cloth has the warp and the woof, which is the threads going one way and the threads going the other way. They weave together, and if the threads were just going one way, it wouldn't hold together. But it needs them both together, binding together, that really weaves the cloth of a really powerful spiritual life of any practice, not just Kriya Yoga, but for Kriya Yogis. Pay attention to the art, pay attention to the science, pay attention to the technique, review, study, but do it with inspiration, with magnetism, with divine magnetic ardor. Have that phrase embedded in our brains, divine magnetic ardor. What is that? What is that? It really helps to meditate on that and just kind of tune into that idea and ask Master, okay, help me to have divine magnetic ardor, because if I have that, then I go into samadhi. So that's kind of like a step-by-step thing. And it's not that easy, but yeah, let's try to understand what is that type of magnetic ardor that attracts God. And so this is where it all comes together. And then next week, we'll get more into the working with inner feeling, emotions, divine feeling, reactive process, all these things. Because that's kind of that's the breaking point, is when we give into negative emotions, desires, or doubt or despair, and we get caught in that and give that too much reality and can't get out of that. That's when we sink, and that's when we tend to stray away. And it's really about working and overcoming and really transmuting and uplifting those things. So this is just art and science. It's just an amazing thing that our gurus have given us. And I just, it's really extraordinary what Swamiji have given. And this book really is what they gave. Just also, I'll answer a question. We'll have questions and answers now, but the answer to many questions of asking, well, why didn't you say this? Or why didn't you include that? Or why did you say such a thing in such a way? I asked Swamiji one time, he was asking for advice about one of his books later in his life. And I had an idea of how to improve something that he had written. It was a good idea. It made sense. And it was something that he could have, or maybe he did in another context. And I said, I think it might sound better this way. He was asking for my advice, so I gave it. I didn't give it unsolicited. But his answer would frustrate some people. And maybe initially it might have frustrated me a little bit, but not after a moment of thought. He said, I wrote it that way because that's how Master wanted me to write it. And so this book actually really was not my kind of invention or creation, or let me figure out how I should say it. I really do believe and feel that when I got myself out of the way, that it allowed Master and Swamiji to say these things in the way that I felt they wanted them to be said, and how and put together in that way. So we have very little time, 10 minutes, for some questions that you can ask about that.
Yeah. So we'll now quickly move into the section of audience's questions. And one that connects very closely to what you just shared, Devarshiji, is from Kamla Devi Beswick, where she says that what are some things that you, Devarshi, did with the writing of this book and in daily life to get out of the way and let God and gurus flow through you? So specifically, what were some things that you...
That's a good question, because that was actually the biggest struggle for me with this book. It's probably why it took me years to write it. I mean, believe it or not, Jyotishji Devaji asked me like 6 years ago to write this book. And I made 2 efforts to write it, and just, it was not at all even close to the right thing. And it's because I was trying to write it. Now, I had to do that. In some way, that steps had to be taken. Now, if I was more like Swamiji, I would have gotten through those steps much more quickly than years, and it would have gotten into that part where I got out of the way. But I finally did understand that I had to somehow completely rethink this and not write it in the way that I thought it was supposed to be written, based on my vast experience with all these things and decades of experience. And sometimes that's a disadvantage. And so I really prayed to be made to get out of the way. That was hard. It's hard to get out of the way. We're so used to being the ones in charge. And I was supposed to write this book and put out the will, and I didn't know how to do that. And, you know, this can apply to anything that we're doing. So this can help others who are not just writing a book, but in everything that we do. And so the biggest part was just to pray deeply to God and to gurus. I have to get out of the way, and I need to feel you flow through me. And strangely enough, in this case with the book, I couldn't get out of the way. I just didn't know how to do it. And I had about a 2-month writing seclusion where the book was really going to be written. I understood generally what was intended, what was needed, not down to the last detail or even to the last chapter, but in a general way. But I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to get myself out of the way enough to do it. And I prayed. And right when that writing seclusion came, this really extreme pain, physical pain came, which was a recurrence of this facial nerve pain that I'd had for earlier some years ago, and it came back with a vengeance. And it comes with dizziness and nausea and being really out of it mentally. And believe it or not, that's when I wrote the book, was when I was going through that. And I was in a state that was like impossible to write a book and to use my brain in a rational way. I had to just, okay, I can't do this, and you all need to be flowing through me to do this. So not everyone has to be, and I joke, but it was like I couldn't get out of the way, so they basically smashed me out of the way, and it was an answer to a prayer to get me out of the way no matter what it takes, and they did. So the important part is to pray. It doesn't have to be as extreme as them kicking us out of the way, but the important part is just to pray to them. Allow me to get out of the way and to see your truth without either my blinders on or with my particular type of glasses that really project my own ideas onto the universe rather than perceiving God. And so the important part is just to pray and ask, and then try to find ways to surrender our little self. I think surrender is a big part of it, because that's what I did. I surrendered myself, and I said, Lord, I can't do this. I'm incapable of doing it, and you'll have to do it through me. And so surrender is essential also, but so is putting out the energy to start. So it's kind of a combination of all those things to learn how to get out of the way and let God flow through us, or help us to perceive as God would perceive, rather than just as we're used to seeing things.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And they say that everyone has a book inside them, but now we're realizing this is what it takes.
I don't think it'll take that for everybody, but just I was maybe
Yeah.
a little too stuck and too stubborn. So,
So,
go ahead.
So the next question is from Devendran Govinder, who says that this book cover how to use energy generated from Kriya Yoga to using it for outward seva, using that energy outwardly. For example, for some work in tech, or for innovation, or for healthcare. So how do we apply?
Yeah, how to use that energy that comes from a deep spiritual practice devotion, divine magnetic ardor, passion, Kriya technique, centeredness, magnetism. So when, to the extent that these things are done in a real way within us, they can start to sort of infiltrate our daily life. For myself, yeah, it's partly being conscious of how to put out energy, how to concentrate, how to pray and tune in. But it also just happens naturally, I think, where when we have awakened yearning for God, then we have just a natural yearning to share that with others. When we start developing an awakening energy there and creativity, it starts to infiltrate how we do our business, how we live life, how we, help others, how we act as a parent or a teacher. And this is what I've seen. I've seen that Kriya yogis, really the greatest benefit that I've seen is that people become better human beings. They become better parents. They become better friends, better business people, artists, teachers, all these things. And so it does start to change our life. And it happens naturally and inevitably. But yeah, we can also more consciously work on it. And, just like that visualization that Swamiji gives about magnetism, I read part of it, that it can, by doing some of these things consciously and working with magnetism in specific ways, with our job, with our friendships, with the the things that are happening in our lives, yeah, we can start to apply them also very specifically, using a lot of the tools actually that Swamiji has given us in a lot of his books. I mean, like the book Money Magnetism, that's a Kriya Yoga book. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's a Kriya Yoga book, but it's about how to take what we're developing as Kriya yogis and apply it to working with this material world and with accomplishing things, and maybe using money as one of the ways to accomplish things. Because yeah, some of the things we're trying to do for God, for friends, for society, yeah, it does need that kind of thing. And so Swamiji has given us a lot of the techniques and tools for bringing Kriya out into art, business, relationships, all these things. That's what all those are all Kriya Yoga books, by the way.
Yeah. So, Devashiji, I'm conscious of time. There are a few more questions from Charu, Shyama, and John Reed and Prisha had submitted some online, but we could take them up next time too. So I now invite you to close with an inspiration, a guided inspiration, and remind the audiences that we'll be back next Wednesday. So over to you.
Okay, so I think I will read this visualization about magnetism that is in the book. It's in the end of the chapter on change your magnetism. And it's an exercise that Swamiji gives for developing magnetism. It's in one of his books, I think the Akash book, Ancient Keys to Attaining Success and Happiness. And again, this is everything that Swamiji gave is for Kriya yogis and bringing Kriya Yoga into active expression in our lives. And when we do that, it's not just that it makes it real in an outward way, but it also starts to inform where we need to learn, or maybe awakens another understanding of working with magnetism when we start working with it in outward ways. So it's all one, our outward life, our inner life, our friendships, our relationship to God. It's all really one in the end. So let's just do this exercise together. And we can close our eyes. And Swamiji writes, magnetism is the secret of all success. It is the secret of all true inspiration and of high creativity. To develop it in the best way, concentrate on the energy in the heart. And I'll add my own words here. Feel whatever you feel in the heart, a pleasant sensation there, an emotion, a feeling of whatever you feel there. Concentrate on that as feeling. And then Swamiji writes, raise that energy to the point between the eyebrows and feel that the upper part of your body is encircled by a golden light. Feel that light centered finally in the top of the head, the Sahasrara, or thousand-petaled lotus. This practice will fill you with magnetism. It will fill you, above all, with bliss. Now then, for creativity, send that energy outward through the point between the eyebrows. Feel magnetism and inspiration in this outflow of energy. Direct them toward whatever task you want to work on creatively. Let's meditate for just a couple of minutes on that. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Do that practice regularly, is what Swamiji was saying, and apply it in whatever way you want to creatively or finding bliss. And this answers that question that what came at the very end, really, in a way. And I believe next week we'll have more time for questions and answers. This week we spent more time than we will, a lot more in just how the book was written and how it came to be, which I think is very important and unique for this book study to be able to share that. So thank you, Lata, for guiding us in this process and really for being the inspiration to do this in this way. So thank you.
Thank you, Devarshiji. And we sign off for this week. Thank you for being such a lovely audience, and see you all next Wednesday.